Some houses seem ordinary at first glance. Simple facades. Closed windows. Seemingly normal lawns. But there are accounts of places where the silence brings no comfort. Houses where residents claim the air changes after sunset. Where footsteps echo without anyone walking. Where doors move without wind. And where even trained priests, men accustomed to facing human suffering daily, left in silence, shaken, unable to sleep that night. Today you will hear accounts of houses associated with exorcism rituals witnessed by American priests. We are not talking about stories told by impressionable neighbors or rumors spread on the internet. We are talking about cases followed by priests officially designated to investigate situations considered spiritually serious. Men who have spent years studying theology, psychology, pastoral demonology, and canon law. Men instructed to distrust before believing. Before any formal rite, the church requires medical evaluations. Psychologists are consulted. Doctors analyze symptoms. The priority is always to rule out mental illnesses, dissociative disorders, epilepsy, schizophrenia, or any neurological condition. The rule is clear: if there is a plausible medical explanation, there is no exorcism. Even so, there are archived reports from American dioceses describing situations that, according to the priests themselves, did not easily fit into clinical diagnoses. Homes where children began speaking with altered voices during prayers. Residences where religious objects were allegedly thrown. Environments where residents claimed to hear knocks coming from inside the walls. Places where fear became almost physical. This documentary does not intend to affirm or deny anything. Our goal is to reconstruct the accounts as they were described by those who were present. Priests, witnesses, families, and also experts who tried to offer alternative explanations. The first case we will address happened in rural Illinois in the early 2000s. A family sought help after strange phenomena began shortly after a home renovation. Initially, they were noises. Then came abrupt changes in behavior in one of the teenage sons. The priest in charge of the local parish initially suspected emotional stress. The family had been experiencing financial difficulties and internal conflicts. But as the reports intensified, he decided to officially document the occurrences. According to the pastoral report, the young man exhibited episodes of aggression during specific prayers. It wasn't at any time. Only when religious texts were recited. Outside of that, his behavior returned to normal. The priest described an episode in which, during a visit to the house, the room temperature suddenly dropped, even with the heating on. He also recorded that the boy had demonstrated physical strength beyond what was expected for his age during a moment of restraint. Before making any decision, the priest requested a psychiatric evaluation. The teenager was examined. No serious disorder was identified. There were signs of anxiety, but nothing that completely explained the episodes described during the prayers. Only after weeks of monitoring and superior authorization was a formal prayer of liberation performed, not yet a complete exorcism, but a preliminary rite permitted in situations considered suspicious. During the prayer, according to the priest's account, the young man reacted with intense resistance, alternating between screams and laughter. After the ritual, the episodes gradually decreased. The priest never publicly stated that it was a case of possession. In an interview years later, he only stated that there are spiritual realities that cannot be ignored. This was just one of the cases. Throughout this documentary, you will hear about houses in Texas, Indiana, Pennsylvania, and California. Residences that were the scene of formal investigations. Priests who documented what they saw. And experts who offered different interpretations. But before we move on, it's important to understand how the Catholic Church in the United States officially structures an exorcism case. Because, unlike what many think, it's not an impulsive decision. It's a long, bureaucratic process surrounded by caution. And it is precisely this process that can completely change the way you view these stories. Before understanding the most intense accounts, it's crucial to understand how a case of possible possession is officially handled within American dioceses. The popular image, often shaped by films, suggests quick decisions, dramatic rituals, and priests acting alone in dark rooms. The institutional reality is very different. In the United States, each diocese can designate a specific priest as an official exorcist. Not all have one, but many maintain at least one priest trained to deal with situations considered spiritually extraordinary. These priests receive specific training that includes sacramental theology, pastoral demonology, and, most importantly, in-depth knowledge of psychology. When a family seeks help alleging strange phenomena in a home, the first step rarely involves any ritual. The process begins with lengthy interviews. The priest listens to the account separately. He asks about medical history, medication use, substance abuse, recent traumas, family conflicts, and psychiatric history. If there is any indication of a serious mental disorder, referral to healthcare professionals is immediate. The Church insists that the overwhelming majority of cases have a natural explanation. Experienced priests often state that 90% of situations involve anxiety, suggestion, unresolved grief, or internal conflicts projected onto the environment. But there is a small percentage that, according to some American exorcists, remains without a simple explanation. A priest from Texas reported that, while visiting a residence in Houston, he noticed something he described as environmental hostility specifically directed at religious objects. According to him, pictures with sacred images repeatedly fell from the wall, while other objects remained intact. Before considering any spiritual hypothesis, he requested a structural inspection of the house. No problems were found in the fixings. The priest recorded in his pastoral diary that he did not immediately believe in the presence of something supernatural, but recognized that the family demonstrated genuine fear. And fear, in itself, was already a reason for intervention. Another case, which occurred in Pennsylvania, involved a house where residents claimed to hear scratching coming from inside the walls during the early morning hours. Technicians were called. No infestation was identified. The family also reported abrupt mood swings in one of the residents, always associated with moments of intense prayer. The priest in charge described hearing sounds he couldn't pinpoint during a nighttime visit. However, he later wrote that he couldn't determine the origin of those noises. Honesty in the record is a recurring theme in official reports. Many priests avoid definitive conclusions. What makes these cases even more complex is the collective psychological factor. When an entire family begins to interpret events through a spiritual lens, each event takes on new meaning. A slamming door can become a sign. A falling object can be interpreted as an attack. The human mind is extremely sensitive to expectation. Even so, some priests claim to have witnessed specific reactions during formal prayers that left them uneasy. Sudden changes in facial expression. Alterations in voice during sacred readings. Physical resistance disproportionate to the situation. A priest from California reported that, in one particular case, the person being observed demonstrated absolute calm until specific prayers were initiated. According to him, the reaction was almost instantaneous. Upon interrupting the prayer, the behavior ceased. Before any major rite, however, authorization from the local bishop is required. The bishop analyzes reports, medical records, and psychological assessments. Only when all natural hypotheses seem insufficient can a formal exorcism be authorized. And even then, many rituals performed are not what the public imagines. They are structured prayers, readings, and liturgical invocations performed with extreme caution. But there are cases where the atmosphere of the house, according to the accounts, seemed to react. In the next segment, we will delve into one of the most detailed accounts recorded by an American exorcist involving a residence in the state of Indiana, where phenomena reportedly intensified precisely after the initial attempt to bless the house. The case, which occurred in the state of Indiana, began in a seemingly ordinary way. A family of 4 had moved into a house built in the 1970s, in a quiet neighborhood with no known history of violence or tragic events. The first few months passed without incident. It was only after a small renovation in the basement that the reports began. According to the priest assigned by the local diocese, the family sought help from the parish, claiming a constant feeling of unease in the basement. The mother described a persistent feeling of being watched. The father initially dismissed any supernatural possibility, attributing the unease to the financial stress of the renovation. But the children began to report recurring dreams involving a dark figure standing on the basement stairs. None of them had mentioned this to each other before casually discussing it during dinner. This detail caught the mother's attention, and she decided to seek religious help. The priest who handled the case described in his report that, during the first visit, he noticed nothing unusual. The house was organized. The family seemed balanced. He performed a simple blessing in the main rooms and advised them to avoid harboring excessive fear. However, events reportedly intensified after this visit. Days later, the mother reported that interior doors began slamming shut, even without a draft. The father checked windows and seals. He found no clear explanation. Small objects disappeared and reappeared in different locations. The most unsettling phenomenon, according to the family, was the sound of footsteps in the basement during the early morning hours. The priest returned to the residence for a new assessment. This time, he decided to stay longer. He recorded that, while in the living room with the parents, he heard a noise coming from the basement stairs. Upon investigating, he found no one. Even so, in his subsequent report, he wrote that structural noises are common in old houses and that he could not associate the sound with any extraordinary event. The turning point occurred a few weeks later. During a prayer led in the master bedroom, one of the children began to exhibit altered behavior. According to the priest, the change was abrupt. The child reportedly went from a calm state to intense agitation the moment certain biblical passages were read. He described a change in the tone of her voice, a fixed gaze, and unexpected physical resistance when he tried to hold her by the shoulders to calm her down. As soon as the prayer was interrupted, the behavior gradually decreased. The priest immediately recommended a psychological evaluation. The child was examined. No psychotic disorder was diagnosed. There was anxiety, but within parameters considered treatable. During the following weeks, the priest performed prayers of liberation, which are different from the formal rite of major exorcism. These are authorized prayers that ask for protection and removal of negative influences. According to the records, the phenomena in the house diminished after the third visit. The noises became less frequent. The children stopped reporting repetitive dreams. The feeling of oppression described by the mother reportedly disappeared. The priest never officially declared that there had been possession. In personal notes, he wrote that some houses accumulate more than memories. The phrase, vague and open to interpretation, remains one of the most quoted passages from this case. Experts who later analyzed the account suggest that the family's emotional environment may have played a central role. Renovations generate stress. Structural changes alter internal sounds of the house. Anxiety can be projected onto the physical environment. On the other hand, the priest himself stated that his experience in that basement left him uncomfortable in a way he couldn't fully describe. And that's the common thread in many of these accounts. There are no categorical statements. There are no definitive declarations. There are only cautious records of something that seemed to go beyond the ordinary. But not all cases ended with a gradual reduction of the phenomena. In some, the accounts became more intense before any improvement. In the next section, we will discuss a case in Texas where the initial intervention apparently triggered an unexpected escalation of events. The case that occurred in Texas was described by an experienced priest as one of the most challenging episodes of his pastoral career. Unlike the previous case, where events unfolded gradually, here the accounts began abruptly and intensely. The residence was located in a suburban area near Houston. The family consisted of a couple and 2 teenage daughters. According to the priest in charge, the first contact occurred after the mother contacted the parish stating that the house had become unbearable during the night. The phenomena described included knocking on the walls always around 3 in the morning. The specific time caught the family's attention, who began to associate it with religious symbolism. The father, initially skeptical, began to feel uneasy when he realized that the knocking did not follow a common plumbing or structural pattern. The priest conducted an initial visit with an investigative approach. He walked through all the rooms, checked windows, doors, attic and basement structure. He did not identify signs of invasion, infestation, or any obvious problem. During that first visit, nothing unusual occurred. However, according to the pastoral report, 2 days after the simple blessing performed at the house, the events intensified. The daughters began to report a feeling of pressure in their chests when trying to sleep. The mother stated that she saw the doorknob of the room move slowly, as if someone were turning it outside. When she opened the door, there was no one in the hallway. The priest returned accompanied by another priest, a common practice in cases that begin to become more complex. They performed structured prayers in each room. It was during this visit that something caught their attention. While reciting specific prayers in the upper hallway, one of the daughters reportedly began to laugh uncontrollably, according to the report. The laughter, described as out of context, ceased when the prayer was interrupted. The priests requested that the young woman be evaluated by healthcare professionals. Neurological and psychiatric examinations were performed. No psychotic disorder or serious neurological condition was diagnosed. Nevertheless, the priest noted that the young woman's reaction during prayers seemed selective. She did not react to normal conversations about religion, but showed intense agitation only when certain liturgical formulas were used. During the third visit, according to the report, the most disturbing episode occurred. A crucifix that was fixed to the wall of the room reportedly fell at the moment the prayer began. The father stated that the object was firmly attached. The priest examined the fastening and found that the screw appeared loose, but could not determine whether it was due to natural wear and tear or another cause. The detail that most struck the priest, according to an interview given years later, was not the crucifix. It was the atmosphere of the house. He described a feeling of constant tension, as if the environment were charged. After weeks of monitoring, the local bishop authorized the performance of a formal minor exorcism rite, directed not necessarily at a person, but at the environment. The ritual was conducted behind closed doors, with only the family present. There are no public recordings. The priest reported that during the rite, the young woman again exhibited altered behavior, alternating between intense crying and laughter. After that night, according to the family, the phenomena gradually ceased. Experts who later analyzed the case suggested the possibility of a collective psychological phenomenon known as emotional contagion. When one family member demonstrates fear, others may amplify perceptions. The priest himself, however, stated that he did not rule out any hypothesis, but that he had witnessed situations that he could not reduce solely to clinical explanations. This case deeply marked the local parish. And it revealed something recurrent in American reports. Often, the phenomena seem to react to attempts at religious intervention. But not all episodes involve teenagers or visible behaviors. In some cases, the focus is exclusively on the house, on the physical environment. In the next section, we will analyze a case that occurred in California, where the focus of the report was not a specific person, but the very structure of the residence. The case reported in California drew attention precisely because it did not involve, at least initially, any direct physical manifestation in a specific person. The focus of the reports was entirely on the house. The residence was located in a relatively isolated area, near a mountainous region. The property had been acquired by a couple in their 40s seeking tranquility away from the urban center. In the first few months, the experience was described as positive: silence, natural landscape, and a sense of refuge. The first signs of discomfort emerged subtly. The couple reported a constant feeling of being watched, especially in the main room at night. Lights were found on in the morning, even after being turned off. The husband believed it was forgetfulness. The wife began noting the times to be sure. The point that led to the search for religious help was the appearance of dark stains on one of the walls of the upper hallway. According to the report, the marks seemed to appear out of nowhere and disappeared days later. Technicians were called to check for leaks or mold. No structural problems were identified. The priest assigned to investigate the case described that, on his first visit, he found nothing to indicate a spiritual phenomenon. He asked detailed questions about the house's history, possible previous deaths, and traumatic events. No significant record was identified. During his second visit, he decided to spend a few hours in the residence at night. It was during this time that he recorded something that deeply affected him. According to his report, while alone in the living room, he heard a scratching sound coming from the upper floor. He immediately went upstairs to check. He found no one. No animals, no open windows, no clear physical evidence. The priest wrote that he could not determine the origin of the noise, but that the feeling in the environment had suddenly changed. He described it as a psychological pressure difficult to explain. Days later, the couple reported that small objects, such as keys and remote controls, were being found in unusual places. The priest insisted that they not interpret every event as supernatural. He recommended caution, observation, and recording. The most unsettling episode occurred during a blessing prayer in the master bedroom. According to the couple, one of the interior doors slammed shut. The priest stated in his report that there was no perceptible draft at that moment. Even so, he acknowledged that old houses can have unpredictable structural shifts. The local bishop did not authorize a formal exorcism at that stage. The recommendation was to continue monitoring the family and completely rule out any environmental cause. Experts consulted suggested hypotheses such as structural microvibrations, thermal expansion of the wood, and even psychological suggestion fueled by the isolation of the residents. However, weeks later, something changed. The couple reported that, during a specific night, they both woke up simultaneously with the sensation that someone was standing in the doorway of the bedroom. Upon turning on the light, there was no one there. The detail that drew attention was the fact that both described the same sensation before discussing what had happened. The priest returned to the house for a new evaluation. This time, he performed a more extensive prayer in all the rooms. During the ritual, nothing visible happened. But the priest recorded that he felt strong inner resistance when reciting certain passages. After this intervention, according to the residents, the phenomena ceased completely. The priest never officially declared that the house was infested with spiritual presence. In a later interview, he stated that some residences seem to accumulate emotional tension from former residents, something that can psychologically influence new occupants. This case reinforces a common characteristic in American accounts: there aren't always dramatic manifestations. Often, what exists is a series of small events that, added together, create a disturbing atmosphere. But there is an even more complex type of account, where not only the house, but also the behavior of an adult begins to change progressively and exclusively in association with religious rituals. In the next segment, we will explore a case that occurred in Pennsylvania involving an adult man who began to react in an extreme way only during specific prayers. The case in Pennsylvania involved a 38-year-old man, married, father of a young child, with no criminal record and no prior psychiatric diagnosis. The family's residence was in a small town, on an ordinary street, without any reputation associated with tragic events. The first signs that something was wrong did not appear at home, but in the church itself. According to the local parish priest, the man began to show visible discomfort during specific celebrations. He avoided looking at the altar, maintained a rigid expression during readings, and on 2 occasions, abruptly left the Mass during the final prayer. His wife reported that at home he exhibited abrupt mood swings, but only after participating in religious gatherings. Outside of that context, his behavior was considered normal. The priest decided to visit him for a private conversation. During the initial dialogue, the man seemed rational, coherent, and aware of his actions. He himself stated that he did not understand why he felt intense irritation when prayers were recited near him. Before considering any spiritual hypothesis, the priest requested a complete medical evaluation. Neurological exams did not indicate epilepsy or brain disorders. Psychiatric evaluation did not identify psychotic or dissociative disorders. It was then that the first documented episode occurred in the house. During a prayer led by the priest in the living room, the man reportedly began to breathe irregularly and showed agitation. According to the report, his voice changed tone, becoming deeper. He allegedly stated that the recited words caused him physical pain. The priest immediately interrupted the prayer and asked him to calm down. The behavior gradually ceased. In the following days, the episodes only occurred when specific religious texts were mentioned. Normal conversations about faith did not provoke a reaction. The selectivity caught the priest's attention. On a later visit, the priest decided to record detailed observations. He noted that, during the recitation of certain passages, the man displayed unusual physical strength when trying to move away. At one specific moment, he had to be restrained by the priest himself and a relative. The most intriguing part, according to the report, was what happened next. As soon as the prayer ended, the man showed confusion, as if he didn't fully remember what had occurred. Even so, the priest maintained a cautious stance. He wrote that psychological dissociation can produce intense reactions under specific emotional triggers. The case was referred to the bishop for evaluation. Before any authorization for a formal rite, the diocese requested continuous psychological monitoring for weeks. During this period, the episodes continued to occur exclusively in a religious context. The home environment also began to be mentioned in the accounts. The wife stated that she heard footsteps in the hallway during the early morning hours. The young son began to avoid entering his parents' room alone, claiming to feel afraid without knowing why. The priest performed an environmental blessing of the residence. During the ritual, according to him, the man again exhibited an intense reaction, even falling to his knees upon hearing certain invocations. After months of monitoring and without a conclusive clinical diagnosis, a formal rite of major exorcism was authorized, conducted with extreme discretion. The ritual was performed in private sessions. There was no recording. The priest recorded that, during the longer prayers, the man alternated between resistance and profound exhaustion. At one point, he reportedly uttered incoherent phrases in a tone that the priest described as different from his usual voice. After 3 sessions over several weeks, the episodes gradually decreased. The man returned to normal activities. According to a later account from his wife, he resumed attending church without experiencing discomfort. The priest never publicly stated that it was unequivocal possession. In his notes, he only wrote that, the line between psychological suffering and spiritual influence can be more complex than we imagine. This case is frequently cited in internal training for American exorcist priests as an example of the need for extreme caution and prolonged monitoring. But there are even more disturbing accounts, where multiple members of the same family began to exhibit almost simultaneous manifestations, creating a scenario that defies individual explanations. In the next segment, we'll explore a case that occurred in the state of Michigan, where a house became the scene of phenomena involving both parents and children simultaneously. The case that occurred in the state of Michigan is frequently cited by American priests as one of the most complex episodes ever witnessed in a residential setting. Unlike previous reports, here it wasn't just one person exhibiting altered behavior. The entire family dynamic began to transform over a few months. The house was located in a suburban area near Detroit. It was a relatively new 2-story building with no public history of violent incidents. The family consisted of a father, mother, and 3 children aged between 8 and 15. The first reports came from the youngest son. He claimed to hear someone calling his name during the early morning hours. The mother initially believed they were common childhood nightmares. However, weeks later, the teenage daughter began to report a similar sensation. The father remained skeptical. He attributed the experiences to the effect of suggestion between siblings. But then he began to notice something different. According to the pastoral report later filed, the father began to hear footsteps in the upstairs hallway even when all the children were asleep in their rooms. He checked the rooms and found no one awake. The family sought help from the parish after a specific incident. During dinner, one of the pictures in the living room fell abruptly from the wall. The detail that caught their attention was that the object was fixed with a sturdy metal support. The father examined the structure and found no obvious wear. The priest assigned to investigate made an initial visit during the day. The house seemed normal. The family showed nervousness, but their accounts were coherent. He recommended keeping a detailed record of any new events. Days later, the incident that profoundly marked the case occurred. During the early morning hours, according to the mother's account, the bedroom doors slammed shut almost simultaneously. The three children woke up startled. The father checked all the windows. None were open. The priest returned to the residence, this time at night. He decided to lead a brief prayer in the main room. During the recitation, the eldest son began to show visible agitation. According to the priest, the teenager went from a calm demeanor to intense irritation when certain passages were mentioned. The most unsettling detail, according to the report, was that while the priest was praying in the living room, the mother claimed to hear scratching coming from the ceiling of the upper hallway. The priest interrupted the prayer to check. Nothing was found. The local bishop was informed. Before any formal authorization, the family was referred for a group psychological evaluation. The examinations did not indicate serious disorders. There were signs of generalized anxiety, which is common in contexts of prolonged fear. In the following weeks, the reports became more intense. The teenage daughter reportedly exhibited a sudden change in behavior during a prayer led by her mother. According to the father, his daughter's voice sounded different for a few moments, deeper and harsher. The priest returned accompanied by another experienced priest. They led a more structured prayer in all the rooms of the house. It was during this visit that, according to the record, one of the hallway lights flickered repeatedly while specific prayers were being recited. After an electrical investigation, no clear defect was identified in the system. What made the case particularly complex was the simultaneity of the reports. Multiple family members claimed to perceive different phenomena, but occurring at the same time. Experts who later analyzed the case suggested a phenomenon of mild collective hysteria, where shared anxiety can amplify individual perceptions. A tense family environment can create a cycle of emotional reinforcement. Even so, the priest wrote in his final report that he witnessed reactions that left him deeply uncomfortable, especially during prayers held in his eldest son's room. After episcopal authorization, a formal rite was conducted for the family and the residents. The ritual took place in 3 sessions over a month. According to the family, the phenomena gradually ceased after the last session. The priest never publicly stated that it was an unequivocal case of multiple possession. But he affirmed that the experience reinforced his conviction that some situations transcend simplistic explanations. This case raised internal debate in the diocese about the possibility of tense family environments serving as catalysts for intense psychological manifestations. But there is an even rarer type of account. Houses where priests claim to feel immediate resistance upon entering, even before any visible manifestation. In the next segment, we will explore a case that occurred in the state of New York, where the priest himself reported a physical reaction upon crossing the threshold of the residence. The case that occurred in New York State is frequently cited among American exorcist priests for a specific reason. According to the official account, the first unusual manifestation did not come from the family. It came from the priest himself. The residence was located in an old area of the northern part of the state, in a city marked by buildings from the early 20th century. The house in question was spacious, with an original wooden structure and a history of several owners over the decades. There were no public records of violent crimes associated with the address. The family that sought help consisted of a couple and their 12-year-old daughter. Unlike other cases, the initial reports did not involve altered behavior in the child, but persistent environmental sensations. The mother described a strong feeling of oppression in the hallway connecting the bedrooms. The father reported difficulty remaining alone in the living room at night. The priest assigned to investigate stated, in a report filed by the diocese, that he felt immediate physical discomfort upon crossing the main door of the house on his first visit. He described a feeling of pressure in his head and mild nausea. He did not comment on anything at that moment so as not to influence the family. During the initial conversation, the residents reported hearing footsteps in the attic, even after a structural inspection ruled out the presence of animals. The daughter mentioned seeing a shadow standing near the stairs on 2 separate occasions. The priest performed a simple prayer for protection in the area. During the recitation, according to him, the physical sensation of unease increased. Even so, no visible manifestation occurred at that moment. In the following days, the family reported an intensification of the phenomena. The daughter began to have difficulty sleeping, claiming that someone was whispering her name. The father stated that small objects, such as books and remote controls, were repeatedly found out of place. The priest returned accompanied by another experienced priest. Both decided to spend part of the night in the residence for direct observation. Around 2 in the morning, according to the report, they heard noises coming from the attic. They immediately went upstairs with flashlights. They found nothing to justify the sounds. The most striking episode occurred during a prayer led in the upper hallway. The head priest recorded that he again felt strong pressure in his head and difficulty maintaining concentration. He momentarily interrupted the rite to regain composure. The family watched in silence. Days later, the daughter exhibited an intense reaction during a prayer led by her mother in her room. According to the report, she began to cry and stated that she wanted to leave the house immediately. The behavior ceased after the prayer was interrupted. The diocese requested a psychological evaluation of the child. No psychotic disorder or relevant neurological condition was identified. There was elevated anxiety, consistent with an environment of constant fear. The bishop authorized an environmental exorcism rite, directed specifically at the residents, not the child. The ritual was conducted with closed doors, with only the parents and the priests present. During the recitation of the liturgical formulas, according to the report, a loud cracking sound was heard coming from the attic. After a subsequent inspection, no clear cause was found. After the rite was completed, the priests remained silent for a few minutes. The head priest reported that the feeling of pressure he had felt since the first visit gradually disappeared. In the following weeks, according to the family, the phenomena ceased completely. Experts who analyzed the case suggested hypotheses such as psychological suggestion induced by the isolation of the residents and the old architecture, which can amplify structural sounds. The priest himself, in a later interview, stated that he did not categorically claim to have experienced a spiritual presence, but acknowledged that his initial physical reaction was something he had never experienced in other houses. This case raised an interesting discussion among theologians and psychologists consulted by the diocese. To what extent can the priest's expectations influence his bodily perception? And to what extent can subjective experiences be interpreted as external signs? But not all accounts involve only sensations or noises. In some cases, religious objects seem to become the center of the manifestations. In the next section, we will explore a case that occurred in the state of Louisiana, where sacred symbols became the direct focus of the events recorded by an experienced priest. The case in Louisiana gained attention within the local diocese for a specific reason. Reports indicated that the phenomena seemed to be concentrated exclusively on religious objects within the house. The residence was located in a small town near rural areas, surrounded by dense vegetation and little-traveled roads. The family was traditionally religious. Sacred images, crucifixes, and small statues decorated several rooms of the house. The first events were considered isolated. A crucifix fell from the living room wall during the early morning hours. The father believed the support might have given way. He replaced the object with reinforced fastening. Days later, a small religious image in the mother's room was found facing the wall. No one in the family admitted to touching it. The priest assigned to the case reported that, on the first visit, he advised the family not to immediately attribute significance to the events. He checked the object's fastenings, suggested possible structural causes, and recommended careful observation. However, the reports continued. According to the pastoral report, during a prayer service in the living room, one of the religious paintings fell again. This time, the screw remained attached to the wall. The supporting wire had broken. The priest noted that he could not say whether the breakage was the result of natural wear and tear, but acknowledged that the moment coincided exactly with the recitation of a specific passage. The most unsettling phenomenon, according to the family, involved a small statue positioned on a piece of furniture in the hallway. The mother stated that she saw the object fall without anyone being nearby. The father said he heard the impact, but did not witness the exact moment. Before any conclusions were reached, the diocese requested a structural inspection of the residence. No electrical problems or abnormal vibrations were found. During the second visit, the priest decided to temporarily remove some religious objects from the house to observe if the events would cease. Curiously, according to the family's account, the noises and falls decreased during that period. This detail generated internal debate among the priests involved. Could the family's emotional focus on religious symbols have amplified their perception of any alteration involving these objects? Or was there something deeper at play? The most striking episode occurred during a nightly prayer in the master bedroom. According to the report, while the priest was reciting specific liturgical formulas, the wardrobe door slowly opened. The priest stated that he did not perceive any obvious draft. He interrupted the prayer and checked the door mechanism. He found no visible defect. Days later, the teenage daughter began reporting recurring dreams involving broken religious images. Anxiety in the house increased considerably. The diocese requested a collective psychological evaluation. No serious disorder was identified. There was increasing family tension, which can potentiate perceptions. After weeks of monitoring, an environmental exorcism rite directed at the residence was authorized. During the ritual, according to the priest, there were no dramatic physical manifestations. However, he described a feeling of intense emotional resistance when reciting certain invocations. After the conclusion of the rite, the phenomena progressively ceased. The priest never publicly stated that the objects had been moved by spiritual force. In his private notes, he wrote that the relationship between intense faith and environment can generate manifestations that defy simple interpretation. Experts consulted later suggested phenomena of selective attention. When objects possess deep emotional significance, any alteration involving them gains greater weight in perception. Even so, the case remains one of the few where the accounts focused almost exclusively on religious symbols. But there is an even more delicate situation, when the priest himself begins to be the target of events after leaving the house. In the next section, we will explore a case that occurred in the state of Ohio, where the priest claimed to have experienced unusual events days after conducting a rite in a particular residence. The case that occurred in the state of Ohio is remembered among American priests for a detail that went beyond the limits of the investigated residence. According to the official report filed by the diocese, the events were not confined to the family's home. They seemed, at least in the priest's perception, to follow him. The residence was located in a medium-sized city, in an old neighborhood with buildings from the 1950s. The family that sought help consisted of an elderly couple and a grandson who had recently moved in with them. The initial reports involved noises coming from the basement during the early morning hours. The grandfather believed they were pipes or wood expansion. The grandmother, however, claimed to feel strong unease when passing through the hallway leading to the basement stairs. The grandson reported episodes of sleep paralysis, describing a sensation of presence beside the bed. The priest assigned to the case highlighted in his report that sleep paralysis is a known and relatively common neurological phenomenon. He explained this to the family before any spiritual considerations. Even so, he decided to visit the residence to offer a simple prayer for protection. During the first visit, nothing extraordinary occurred. The environment seemed normal. The priest spoke at length with the residents and recommended psychological counseling for the grandson due to the nocturnal episodes. Days later, the family reported an intensification of the noises in the basement. The priest returned to the house and decided to pray in the specific location where the sounds were most frequent. It was at this moment that, according to the report, the most striking episode occurred. While reciting the liturgical formulas in the basement, the priest stated that he heard a loud impact coming from behind him. Turning around, he noticed that a box stored on a shelf had fallen to the floor. He checked the support. He found no clear reason for the fall. The detail that unsettled him was that the box seemed to be positioned stably before the impact. Even so, he recorded in the report that he could not affirm external interference. Old houses have natural vibrations, especially in basements. After this visit, the priest returned to the parish and did not discuss the incident with other priests at that time. However, days later, he began to report unusual personal experiences. According to his later testimony, he woke up 2 nights in a row with the feeling of being watched. On one of these occasions, he stated that he heard a noise similar to the sound of something being dragged on the floor of the parish room. He checked the surroundings. He found nothing. The priest wrote that, as a man of faith and also of rational formation, he initially attributed the events to accumulated stress. Prolonged cases can affect the emotional state of the priest himself. Even so, he decided to report the events to the local bishop, not as proof of spiritual activity, but as an honest record of his experience. The diocese recommended that another priest temporarily take over the family's case while he rested. The second priest performed a new blessing rite in the residence. After this intervention, according to the family, the noises in the basement decreased significantly. Regarding the first priest, he reported that the events in his room ceased after a period of personal prayer and spiritual guidance. Experts consulted later suggested a phenomenon of psychological transference. When someone becomes deeply involved in a narrative laden with tension, the brain can prolong the experience in a different environment. The priest himself stated that he never claimed to have been followed by any entity. He wrote that the human mind can be influenced by the context in which it is embedded. Even so, the case remains unique because it involved the priest's own direct perception outside the investigated environment. This episode reinforces a delicate point in many exorcism accounts in the United States: the psychological impact on the priest. But there is an even more complex type of case. Houses where multiple investigations were carried out over years, involving more than one exorcist and different families. In the next section, we will explore a case in the state of Arizona, where the same residence was the target of 3 distinct investigations at different times. The case that occurred in the state of Arizona is one of the few recorded instances where the same residence was investigated by different priests over nearly a decade. It wasn't a single family with isolated reports. 3 distinct family groups, at different times, sought help alleging similar experiences within the same house. The residence was located on the outskirts of a medium-sized city near desert areas. Built in the 1980s, it had no official record of violent crimes or tragic events. It was an ordinary, single-story house with a large yard and an apparently solid structure. The first investigation occurred after a couple reported a constant feeling of oppression in the master bedroom. According to the report at the time, the wife claimed to hear whispers during the early morning hours. The husband reported metallic noises coming from the kitchen when no one was present. The priest in charge performed a simple blessing. The reports temporarily decreased, but the family decided to move months later due to persistent discomfort. Years later, a second family acquired the house. Without any knowledge of the previous reports, they began to experience similar events. This time, the focus was on the children's bedroom. The 7-year-old child claimed to see a figure standing near the door at night. The parents initially interpreted it as a child's imagination. However, they began to hear knocking on the wall separating the bedroom from the living room. The priest assigned in this second phase recorded that, during the visit, he felt slight discomfort while standing in the central hallway of the house. He did not report clear physical phenomena, but noted a subjective feeling of environmental tension. After formal prayer, the report ceased for some time. The third episode occurred almost 10 years after the first investigation. A new family moved into the residence. This time, the phenomena described were more intense. According to the archived report, light objects were frequently found out of place. Interior doors slammed shut with unexpected force. The main resident reported a feeling of heaviness in her chest upon entering the master bedroom. The assigned priest, unlike the previous ones, decided to investigate the history of the residence more thoroughly. He discovered there was no record of violence, but identified that the land had belonged, decades earlier, to a family involved in prolonged legal disputes. There was no evidence of an associated tragedy, but the fact was noted. During a prayer conducted in the room, according to the report, one of the ceiling lights began to flicker slightly. After an electrical inspection, no obvious defect was found. The priest requested a psychological evaluation of the family. No serious disorder was identified. There was increasing anxiety associated with fear of the events. The diocese authorized a formal rite of environmental exorcism. During the ritual, according to the priest, there were no dramatic manifestations, but he recorded an intense feeling of inner resistance when reciting certain invocations. After the rite, the report ceased. What makes this case particularly intriguing is not a specific event, but the repetition of patterns over years with different families, without contact between them. Experts who analyzed the case suggested that the house's architecture could amplify natural sounds, especially due to the internal metal structure exposed to intense thermal variations in the desert climate. Others pointed to the possibility of indirect influence. Small communities often share rumors, even unconsciously, which can shape the expectations of new residents. The priest involved in the third investigation wrote that he could not affirm a permanent spiritual presence, but acknowledged that the repetition of similar reports at different times made him reflective. This case raised debate within the diocese about the concept of a charged environment. Some theologians argue that places can accumulate intense emotional memories. Psychologists, on the other hand, argue that expectation and suggestion play a determining role. But there is an even rarer type of case, houses where the reports involved physical phenomena witnessed by multiple people at the same time, including external visitors. In the next section, we will explore a case that occurred in Florida, where neighbors claimed to have heard and witnessed events in the investigated residence. The case in Florida gained attention within the diocese because, according to records, the reports were not limited to the family living in the residence. Neighbors claimed to have heard unusual sounds coming from the house at specific times, which increased the complexity of the investigation. The residence was located in a relatively quiet residential area, near a wooded area and away from main roads. It was a single-story house with a simple structure and a backyard. The family consisted of a single mother and 2 teenage children. The first reports emerged after the mother contacted the local parish stating that loud noises were coming from the attic during the early morning hours. She initially believed they were animals. A specialized service was called for inspection. No signs of infestation were found. Days later, one of the neighbors reported hearing intense banging on the side wall of the house around 3 in the morning. He believed that some nighttime construction was taking place, but upon looking out the window, he realized that the residence was completely dark. This detail led the mother to seek religious help. The assigned priest recorded that, on his first visit, he perceived an atmosphere of strong emotional tension. The children showed evident fear. The mother reported difficulty sleeping and a constant feeling of being watched. During the initial inspection, the priest went up to the attic accompanied by one of the children. He found nothing but stored boxes. Even so, he stated in his report that the space seemed abnormally stuffy, even at night. The episode that intensified the situation occurred during a prayer led in the main room. According to the family's account, while the priest was reciting specific passages, a loud impact was heard coming from the attic. The sound was described as something heavy being dragged. The priest interrupted the prayer and immediately went upstairs to check. He found no displaced object or clear evidence of movement. That same night, according to a neighbor's account, new noises were heard, this time accompanied by a slight vibration in the shared wall between the houses. The diocese requested a more detailed structural inspection. Engineers inspected the house. No significant structural problem was identified that would justify the described sounds. In the following days, the eldest daughter began reporting recurring dreams involving the house collapsing. The youngest son claimed to have seen a shadow crossing the hallway during the early morning hours. The priest requested psychological evaluations for the teenagers. No serious disorder was diagnosed, but both presented elevated levels of anxiety. During the second nighttime visit, the priest brought another experienced priest for accompaniment. Both remained in the residence until after midnight. According to the filed report, around 2:40 a.m., they heard 3 loud knocks coming from the living room ceiling. The 2 priests recorded the event separately to avoid mutual influence. Both described the sound as a solid impact, not similar to a slight structural crack. Even so, no displaced objects were found in the attic. The diocese authorized a formal environmental exorcism rite. The ritual was conducted in a single, prolonged session. During the recitation of the liturgical formulas, according to the head priest, the atmosphere in the house seemed extremely tense. He reported feeling intense emotional resistance upon completing the final invocations. After the ritual, the report ceased abruptly. The neighbors did not hear any more knocking. The family stated that the noises in the attic disappeared completely. The teenagers reported improved sleep. Experts consulted later suggested hypotheses such as intense thermal expansion due to the region's climate, which can cause more pronounced cracking and vibrations in certain structures. The priest, however, stated that the synchronicity between the prayers and the recorded impacts was the element that most impressed him. This case remains one of the few where external witnesses confirmed at least part of the sound events. But there is an even more unsettling type of report. Houses where the phenomena seem to reach their peak immediately before the final intervention authorized by the diocese. In the next segment, we will explore a case that occurred in the state of North Carolina, where the events reached maximum intensity on the eve of the formal rite. The case that occurred in North Carolina is remembered within the local diocese as one of the episodes in which events seem to reach their peak just before the formal intervention authorized by the bishop. According to the archive report, the intensity of the phenomena increased dramatically on the eve of the official rite. The residence was located in a semi-rural area, surrounded by tall trees and far from neighboring houses. It was a 2-story building with a partially underground basement. The family consisted of a couple and a 16-year-old daughter. The initial reports began similarly to other cases: noises during the early morning hours, a feeling of being watched, doors moving without apparent explanation. The father, initially skeptical, began to record times and circumstances to try to identify a logical pattern. What drew attention was that the events began to concentrate in the teenage daughter's room. According to the pastoral report, the young woman began to exhibit abrupt mood swings, specifically when religious objects were placed in the room. On 2 occasions, the mother found the crucifix that was on the dresser thrown on the floor. The priest assigned to the case conducted separate interviews with each family member. No history of serious disorder was identified. The teenager showed anxiety, but maintained coherence in her speech. During the first prayer conducted in the room, the young woman showed strong irritation upon hearing certain passages. According to the priest, her breathing became heavy and she asked for the prayer to be interrupted because the sound was bothering her. The priest immediately recommended a psychiatric evaluation. Tests were performed. No significant psychotic or neurological condition was identified. Even so, the events continued. The episode that led to the formal request for episcopal authorization occurred 2 weeks later. During the early morning hours, according to the family's account, the door to the teenager's room began to bang repeatedly against the wall. The father tried to hold her, but stated that he felt unexpected resistance when pushing her back. He described that there seemed to be a counterforce pushing from the inside, even though his daughter was sitting on the bed crying. The diocese was informed immediately. The bishop requested a full report and authorized a formal exorcism rite, scheduled for 2 days later. It was the night before the rite that, according to the priest, the events reached their peak intensity. The family reported hearing footsteps running in the upstairs hallway, even with everyone gathered in the living room. Light objects in the kitchen were reportedly found displaced the following morning. The teenager stated that she heard continuous whispers while trying to sleep. The priest decided to spend part of that night at the residence for direct observation. Around 3 in the morning, according to his written record, a loud impact was heard coming from the basement. He immediately went down with the girl's father. No objects appeared to be displaced. The most striking detail, however, was the atmosphere described by the priest. He wrote that he felt intense psychological oppression during that night, something he had not experienced with equal force in other cases. The following morning, the formal rite was performed. The ritual took place in the master bedroom, with the doors closed. Only the parents and 2 priests were present, in addition to the teenager. According to the report, during the most solemn prayers, the young woman displayed significant physical resistance, alternating between crying and nervous laughter. The priest recorded that, upon concluding the final invocation, the teenager collapsed in profound exhaustion. After the rite, the atmosphere in the house seemed to change immediately, according to reports. The feeling of tension described by the family gradually disappeared in the following hours. In the weeks that followed, there were no further incidents. Experts who analyzed the case suggested that the proximity of the rite may have intensified collective anxiety, leading to a more intense interpretation of sounds and natural events. The priest, however, stated that the sudden escalation before the intervention was the aspect that most affected him. He wrote that, regardless of the final explanation, the experience reinforced his conviction that certain moments require extreme prudence and prolonged accompaniment. This case raised an important discussion within the diocese about the psychological effect of the expectation of a solemn ritual. When everyone believes that something decisive is about to happen, human perception can become even more sensitive. But there is one last type of account that completes this set of cases, situations in which, years later, priests still claim to remember specific details that leave them uneasy. In the next segment, we'll move into Block 14, where we'll analyze retrospective accounts from American priests who, even decades later, claim they can't fully explain what they witnessed. Some of the most unsettling accounts aren't about screams, falling objects, or slamming doors. They're in the persistent memories of those who conducted the rituals. In the state of Illinois, a retired priest gave an interview years after participating in several rites authorized by the diocese. He stated something that caught the attention of religious researchers and psychologists: sounds pass. Images pass. What remains is the feeling. According to him, there was one specific case he could never completely forget. The residence was located in a medium-sized industrial city. The family was discreet, not very involved with the religious community until the events began. The original account included altered behavior of an adult male during formal prayers. The rite was conducted after a long process of medical and psychological investigation. There were no spectacular manifestations officially recorded. No objects flew around the room. No inexplicable voices were recorded. But the priest stated that, at a certain point during the prayer, he felt something he described as a conscious resistance. He reported that, while reciting a specific invocation, he had the clear impression that the atmosphere in the room changed density. It wasn't a visible change. It was an internal, almost bodily perception. After the ritual, the phenomena in the house ceased. The family resumed their normal lives. The man who had experienced intense reactions returned to his routine activities. However, decades later, the priest stated that he still remembered precisely the sensation he experienced in that room. Another priest, in the state of Massachusetts, reported a similar experience. He participated in an environmental rite in an old residence where noises and shadows had been reported for months. During the ritual, nothing extraordinary occurred. Still, he described that, upon crossing the upper hallway after the prayers were concluded, he felt an intense chill that he couldn't rationally explain. He stated that, as a man trained in both theology and psychological discernment, he always sought natural explanations for everything he witnessed. But he admitted that some moments remain without a clear answer. There is also a report from the state of Missouri, where a priest stated that, after participating in a case involving a teenager with intense reactions during prayers, he spent months reflecting on the emotional impact of the rite. He declared that what marked him most was not the young woman's behavior, but the silence that took over the house after the ritual concluded. According to him, it was as if the environment had been emptied. These retrospective accounts raise important questions. To what extent does human memory amplify past sensations? Can the emotional impact experienced in situations of extreme tension remain as a physical impression in memory? Psychologists argue that intense experiences leave deep marks on sensory memory. Theologians affirm that spiritual confrontations leave lasting impressions on the soul. The common thread among these priests is not the categorical assertion that they confronted undeniable supernatural forces. It is the honesty in admitting that certain experiences remain difficult to reduce to simple explanations. Many of them emphasize that most investigated cases end with natural explanations, psychological disorders, environmental factors, collective suggestion. But they also acknowledge that there are episodes that defy immediate interpretation. One priest summarized it in a phrase that resonates in different American dioceses: "The scariest thing is not what we saw. It's what we can't fully explain." These testimonies, shared years later, do not seek sensationalism. They are cautious accounts, marked by prudence and responsibility. And perhaps it is precisely this caution that makes these stories even more unsettling. In the next and final section, we will conclude this journey by analyzing what these cases reveal about faith, fear, psychology, and the boundary between what can be explained and what remains in the realm of the unknown. After all these accounts, an inevitable question remains. What really happens inside these houses? Throughout the United States, experienced priests have reported knocks with no clear origin, displaced objects, intense reactions during prayers, and atmospheres that seem to change without any identifiable physical reason. In each case, there was medical investigation. There was psychological analysis. There was extreme caution before any formal rite. And yet, some episodes continue to be remembered decades later. Not because they definitively proved anything, but because they touched on a zone where explanation and mystery meet. The priests themselves insist that most investigated cases end with natural causes. Emotional disorders, collective anxiety, misinterpreted structural phenomena. The human brain is capable of creating intense sensations when subjected to prolonged fear. But they also admit that there are situations that don't fit perfectly into any category. Houses where multiple families, at different times, reported similar patterns. Environments where tension seemed to concentrate in certain rooms. Physical reactions that only arose during specific invocations. The line separating psychology from spirituality is never simple. Mental health experts argue that religious contexts can intensify emotional responses. Theologians argue that the spiritual dimension cannot be dismissed simply because it is not measurable by scientific instruments. Perhaps the truth lies at the intersection. Perhaps some cases are purely psychological. Others, purely environmental. And perhaps there are rare situations where multiple factors intertwine in a way too complex for immediate explanation. What is most striking in these accounts is not the noises or slamming doors. It is the human impact. Families living for weeks under constant fear. Teenagers developing profound anxiety. Priests carrying memories they cannot completely erase. Regardless of the final interpretation, these cases reveal something fundamental about the human mind. When the unknown invades the space that should be safest, one's own home, fear takes on amplified proportions. And it is at this point that faith and psychology meet. Faith offers structure, ritual, a sense of protection. Psychology offers understanding, diagnosis, treatment. In many of these accounts, the two walked hand in hand. And perhaps that is the most important aspect of all. Not the confirmation of invisible forces, but the recognition that fear, when not understood, can become as powerful as any imagined entity. Now I leave you with a question. If you were in a house where multiple events defied immediate explanation, what would your first reaction be? To seek a rational explanation? To call for spiritual help? Or simply to leave and never return? These accounts continue to be discussed in dioceses, in universities, in psychology and theology forums. And perhaps they will continue to be debated for a long time. Because in the end, what scares us most is not what we know. It is what remains without a definitive answer. And it is precisely in this space between the known and the unknown that these stories continue to live. If you want to hear more documented accounts, carefully and thoroughly analyzed, stay tuned. Because the next case could be even more disturbing. If you've made it this far, it's because this type of story truly grips you until the very last second. Here on the channel, we don't treat these accounts as mere legends. We investigate, analyze, and cross-reference faith, psychology, and documented facts to bring you stories that will make you think even after the video ends. So if you enjoy this kind of deep, serious, and just right disturbing content, subscribe to the channel now. Because every week there are new cases, new accounts, and new investigations that will challenge what you believe you know about what is real, and what may lie beyond what we see. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episodes. And tell me in the comments, do you believe everything has a rational explanation, or do you think there are things we simply can't understand? See you in the next story.